We typically measure the impact of ancient empires in centuries, but the events we're looking at today fit into a window of just over 34 years, a lifespan shorter than many modern careers. This timeline begins with a specific prediction. The text records the angel Gabriel appearing to a young woman named Mary, announcing that she would have a son. Gabriel's message contained a striking paradox. He claimed this child would rule as a king forever, yet the birth itself took place in a cattle shed. The child was immediately targeted. Visitors from the east arrived after following a star, an event that inadvertently triggered an assassination plot by the local authorities, which the infant barely survived. This sets up the central question of the narrative. How can a child starting as a hunted refugee fulfill a prophecy of eternal kingship when he only has 3.5 decades to make his mark? After the infancy accounts, the narrative skips ahead to the first specific milestone, age 12. At this age, the boy is found in the temple, not as a student, but engaging in deep theological discussions with the established teachers of the day. It's the first recorded instance of him stepping into the public role the prophecy had outlined for him years earlier. But following that event, the record stops. For the next 18 years, the timeline is a complete blank, with no recorded actions or words. This silence places immense pressure on the remaining years. If the prophecy was to be fulfilled, the entire weight of that mission would have to be concentrated into his final years of adulthood. The silence breaks at age 30. He emerges to be baptized, signaling the start of his public work. This act serves as the trigger for his primary task, traveling to teach and preach about the arrival of a new kingdom. He immediately scales his operations by selecting 12 men, his apostles, to assist him and spread his message further than he could alone. This final segment on the timeline is the most active. In just 3.5 years, the pace of the narrative accelerates, with accounts of his travels and actions becoming much more frequent. The reports of his work grew in scale. The text describes him feeding thousands of people using only a few fish and loaves of bread when logistical supplies were non-existent. The actions described became increasingly extreme, moving from healing the sick to the final claim of authority, the power to bring the dead back to life. These miracles functioned as a series of credentials. For someone claiming to be the king of an eternal heavenly realm, these acts were the physical evidence used to demonstrate that he possessed the power to back up such a claim. But that 3.5-year sprint hit a sudden final obstacle. The narrative focuses heavily on the final 24 hours of his life, a dense sequence of events leading directly to his execution. This brings us to the final count. From birth to the end of his life, the entire sequence took just over 34 years. But this short duration was merely the starting point for an influence spreading far beyond that timeline. In this arc, the brevity of the 34 years doesn't signal an incomplete mission. Instead, it shows how a highly concentrated period of action was used to establish the foundation for the eternal kingdom promised at the very beginning.